which you're welcome to bring. So I tried to condense it, and I think we got down to 9 sources in the end, out of which some might think there were others I should have included, some might think that there are some of these that I should have excluded, and I acknowledge that all that could be true. These are the ones which I thought were important for what I'm going to say, and since no one knows yet what I'm going to say, you can't argue at the moment. Can we start?
Yes. Yeah. Well,
Excellent. So, first of all, before I start, 2 introductions. The first introduction is really to thank the Beit Midrash program, and in particular Kaylin, who has gone to the ends of the world and dealt with many difficult personalities in order to make sure the Beit Midrash program actually is up and running, and nothing ever seems to deter him. And he's managed to pull all these different organizations, groups and rabbis together, which is probably the hardest group of people to bring together in the community. So a big thank you to him, and I encourage people to continue going. On Wednesday night, I believe there's always a Chavruta learning session, and every Sunday night there's a different shiur, and that will continue until Kaylin tells us that he's trying something different, but I believe over the next few weeks that's continuing, or at least until Yom Tov, so the next couple of weeks. That's the first thing. The second thing that I wanted to acknowledge is this particular room, and not just because I'm the rabbi here, but actually the Beit Midrash itself is new. All these books are also new, and that is thanks to the Goldberg family, and since we never really had a proper ceremony to acknowledge this new room, because although the room itself was always here, it looks very different, so that should also be acknowledged, the place we are in. And I will now start the shiur. So, first of all, I will also say that at the start that there will always be, with a particular issue like this, there's never really ever any 2 people who actually 100% agree on an issue like this, and there's always people who think that you should have been more conservative, more liberal. All of that is part of the topic, and I welcome discussion and disagreement. There is nothing worse than giving a shiur and no one talks at all, at least for me, because then you feel like, well, you don't really know if people did enjoy, didn't enjoy, they agreed, they didn't agree. So I would rather be able to generate discussion, and people shouldn't feel afraid I don't think anyone's going to feel afraid, but people shouldn't feel uncomfortable to jump in and ask questions or point out something which I have left out. Parts of this topic are new to me as well, and I had a lot of fun researching the topic as well. I learned a lot, so people should feel free to jump in and ask questions or make comments, although not for too long. That's another very brief introduction. I want to start now by talking about, when we talk about this topic, women in the Orthodox world, I'm not going to address tonight the topic of women and learning Torah. That is because it's going to make the shiur too long, and I think that at least in the modern Orthodox world, we've almost reached the stage where women learning Gemara is accepted more or less, and obviously there are exceptions to this, more or less by everybody. That wasn't the case even 10 or 20 years ago, I think, but today, even in the right wing of modern Orthodoxy, I would say that has become more or less a norm, and therefore I don't want to talk about that, mainly because we don't have a lot of time, although it is interesting historically how that developed, and Beit Yaakov and the Chavetz Chaim, and what they allowed girls to learn in the Haredi school system, which also went through a big change, and Rav Soloveitchik, and then Rav Lichtenstein and others, and Migdal Oz, that was really who were really the pioneers in introducing Gemara learning to girls and to women. But we're not going to talk about that tonight, and we're instead going to skip straight to the concept of women as start off as women as giving psak halacha, women giving halachic rulings, and also then talk about the concept of women rabbis or women as rabbinic authorities, and I think that there might be a difference between that. And first of all, we're going to start off, whenever you want to start off talking about a topic, you actually have to define what the topic is. So, with regards to smicha, when we talk about that somebody has smicha today, what does that mean?
It means different things to different people. Some kind of smicha don't cover everything.
Right, okay, it means different things to different people. But when someone walks around going, I've got smicha, what does that mean? Right, exactly. You've got rabbinic ordination. You're correct, and Gavi, that there are some who, I mean, the most common one to have it in, the most common topic to have it in today is Isur v'Heter, right, more or less the laws of Kashrut. But it means, and it does mean different things to different people, but as a generalization, when someone says, I have smicha, it means I have a certificate which says I'm a rabbi. However, that's not the original understanding of smicha, and if you look 3 lines into the first source, the Rambam is going through the historical process of smicha. Moshe Rabbeinu samach Yoshua bayad. We know this from the Torah itself. The first smicha ever given was when Moshe put his hands on Yoshua. Shene'emar, as it says, as the Torah tells us, vayismoch et yadav alav v'yitzaver, that he lent his hands on him. And v'chein hashivim skenim, the 70 elders, Moshe also gave them smicha. And then if you go to Halacha Bet, the Rambam asks, what is the idea of smicha for generations? Not the concept, right, that they put your hand on their head. You call him rabbi. You say to him, you now have smicha. And you also, and this is what's most important, you basically become a dayan. You have the opportunity, ladun, not lifsok, ladun, to become a judge, and also in financial matters or matters of fines. And so the original smicha we see, at least according to Rambam, and that smicha has stopped today, at least according to nearly everybody. That concept of smicha has stopped, and today we really only have an imitation of that smicha. But the first smicha was only given to people who were judges, not rabbis that we have today, where everyone walks around going, I've got smicha, I've got smicha. The idea was, that the original idea of smicha was that somebody would say that you're now not just a rabbi, but a dayan, a judge on a beit din. You can now not only have the authority to say, I am going to teach you how to make tea on Shabbat, or how to wash your vegetables if you're making a salad, but actually I now have permission to become a judge in Dinei Mamonot, in financial matters, and be a judge on the beit. And that was the original smicha, and as you know, that died out. There were a couple of people, including the Shulchan Aruch himself, Rav Yosef Karo, who tried to reintroduce that. We do not have that today, and therefore the question is, what is the smicha of today? And we'll see soon that according to nearly all opinions, women can't serve as dayanim. Okay, they learn that from a pasuk, but we'll get to that. Okay, so therefore, whilst the original smicha, at least according to most people, and we will see that soon, like I said, couldn't be given to women, the question is, what about today's smicha? What is today's smicha? So if you have a look at the Ramah in Yoredea, the Ramah was, of course, known to us today as the Poskot of Ashkenaz, right? The Shulchan Aruch writes his book, codifying Halacha, and comes along the Ramah and says, I've already written a book, what do I do now? And so instead of producing a new book, he just adds footnotes to the Shulchan Aruch. And on this idea of smicha, says the Ramah, Inyan hasmichut shenahagu bizman hazeh, the idea of smicha in today's time, says the Ramah, it's not some official thing, it's just so everybody knows that your rabbi has said about you that you can give a psak halacha. Doesn't make you a judge, it's basically like we have today, going around with a certificate. And it also, in this today, I think is less relevant, but in those days it was more relevant, also so that your rabbi knows that you're going around giving psak halacha, right? There is a halacha that you shouldn't give psak halacha in front of your rabbi unless he gives you permission. And also, who says that when your rabbi is alive, you should be able to give psak halacha, you should really defer to him. And so, therefore, says the Ramah, if his rabbi has already died, ain't sarich lesmichut. He might not even need smicha at all. If you know that he's a Talmid Chacham, what does he need smicha for? If you know that somebody knows the halacha, what does it matter whether he has a certificate or not? A person knows the rule, they should be able to tell you. Okay, and so therefore the smicha which we have today, at least according to the Ramah here, is not that you become a judge and you could sit on the beit din, and we already know that, but the Ramah is actually telling us this inside. It's actually just the idea that we have today, that you have a certificate because your rabbi, whoever you learned under, has tested you or asked you a few questions, you gave him a few answers, he liked your answers, and he said, this person knows enough that I trust that if he gives psak halacha, I trust what he's saying, and I think that all of you should trust him as well. So that is different. It's different to the original smicha, and the Ramah points that out. There is, however, a different Ramah. Not in the Ramah and his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, but the Ramah also wrote other things, and one of the things that he wrote was a halachic responsa. And in that halachic responsa, he actually says differently, and over there he says, even though the smicha that we have today is not like the original smicha, and that a person becomes a dayan, etc., even so, he says, and Rav Hershel Shechter also quotes this in one of the articles he writes, even so, even the imitation of the smichas is the Ramah. I think it's in Yoredea, it's number 24, it's response to number 24, if someone wants to look it up. Even so, even though it's an imitation, a person cannot be granted that if they weren't able to get the original smicha. So, in other words, a woman would not have been able to get the original smicha, at least according to the majority of opinions, because she can't become a judge, and so therefore even the imitation smicha, according to this halachic responsa, again, I say according to this halachic responsa, there are different opinions, she would not be able to get that smicha.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Are you saying there are three smichas or two? So you're saying there's the original smicha as a Moshe Rabbeinu on Yoshua. That was smicha 1. Smicha 2 is based in the Rambam, where there's this some sort of hyper smicha to create dayanim, and then smicha number 3 is the smicha that Rama's talking about, which is just a license to give psak.
So say again, number 1 and number 2.
So do you think there are two smichas in this Rambam? I think there's a smicha which is the original hands-on smicha, and the smicha Doros, which is a smicha which allows somebody to function as a dayan, and then what the Ramah is talking about is a third type of smicha, or is the smicha in the Ramah just a sort of variation of the second smicha in the Ramah?
So I would say one of the options that you didn't give me, actually, which is that you'd say there were 3 smichas, what you said, but I left the first one out. In other words, the concept of Moshe putting his hand on Yoshua is no longer relevant.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would say then, therefore, that there are 2 smichas, and there's actually a third one which I wanted to talk about and I haven't got to, and that is that I would call it a sociological smicha. So in other words, the person has a smicha, has a certificate saying he's a rabbi, but there is a concept which I don't particularly like, and I think in the year 2016 is a little bit, what's the point? But there is a concept called the Marad Da'atra, which I just think means a sociological smicha, which means that you were given permission or someone for one reason, most of the time today it's anyway self-appointed, but you were said, or you say, or other people say, that you are the Marad Da'atra, which means that you're the rabbi of this place, and not only do you have smicha, in other words, someone has said that you can give psak halacha, or someone has said you know enough to be called a rabbi, but actually the particular community in which you live rely solely on you for psak halacha. And that is an interesting type of smicha. I think today it's redundant, although there would be many people who would disagree with me. And the reason why I think it's redundant is because I think it applied more when people had less knowledge. Today, when everybody can just get on their phones and look something up, and if I tell you something, you can automatically look it up and tell me you're wrong. And you see that also with school children today. You can't really say whatever you like anymore because they can quickly get on the computer and tell you, well, you're wrong because of this, this, and this, and it's with everything. And so the concept of Amara Da'atra, I think, is a little bit strange, because to say that one person is in charge of this particular, you could say that a rabbi is in charge of deciding policy for a shul, but when it comes to a halachic ruling, anybody can sort of decide to do whatever they like. All you have to do is go on Google. So that's a third sociological smicha, which we might come back to, and its relevance if we have time. But again, there are definitely 2 types of smicha. Okay, one which was the original smicha, the idea that a person became a judge and could judge on monetary matters, and anyone who couldn't become a judge obviously couldn't get that smicha. That includes women. And the other one, which I think, which is today, which is more just a piece of paper saying you've learned a bit. Okay, and obviously there are some people who have learned more, there's some people who've learned less, but that's basically the concept behind it. Now I want to have a look at where we know, and I've already said this, but where we actually know it from in sources that a woman can't become a judge. And again, there are different opinions about this, but this is what this is where many authorities learn it from. The Gemara in Shavuot says the following: Minahane Milei. So how do we know? Basically, the Mishnah over there says that women can't take certain oaths when it comes to testimonies. There are some things that women cannot testify for. In Jewish law, there are many things that they also can. We have the concept also of Eid Echad Ne'eman Be'isurin, with matters of Isurin, of forbidden things, one witness is believed, and that also applies to women. But there are also things they can't testify for. And the Gemara asks, where do we know this from? The Tanu Rabbanan, as the rabbis taught, Va'amdu Shnei Ha'anashim Ba'idim HaKatuv Medaber. And so, because of the pasuk that says, and again, we're still on the first sheet, right at the bottom, and 2 men shall stand. It's talking about Eidim, and because it says Anashim, it's the Gemara learns out that it's only talking about men. Therefore, says many different commentaries on the Gemara, and the Smart in particular, but there are many others as well, say that because they can't be witnesses, they also can't be judges. Now, that is not the only opinion that we have, and we will get to that, and there's a reason, because there's an obvious, what's the obvious question? We say that women can't be judges. There was a very famous judge. Right, exactly, Devorah, okay? So how could Devorah have been a judge if there were no judges? So the first question that I wanted to ask is, and the first question we have to ask ourselves when it comes to women giving psak halacha, and actually, more importantly, women having smicha, is the smicha that we have today the same smicha, or does it have to be the same smicha which was originally given, which included dayanut, which included judging? Because then there might be a problem with it, because women can't be judges, and therefore if the smicha, even the imitation smicha, because no one thinks we have the same smicha today as they did before, but if the imitation smicha has to be the same or have the same guidelines, then that's a problem. So that's the first issue that we have to deal with. We're now going to come to the second. And by the way, just as an added point, no one thinks, even in the Haredi world, that if someone comes to you, if someone comes to a woman and says, can you please teach me how to make a cup of tea on Shabbat, that she has to say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't answer that because I'm a woman. Okay, I don't know anyone who says that. So we're obviously not talking about giving halacha in that sense. Okay, and just saying everyone knows this, or this is something which is generally well known, and therefore I can teach it to you. I don't think there's anybody who would suggest that that wasn't allowed, and so therefore we're really talking about the concept of smicha and having some kind of authority over a shul, over an organization, or over a group of people. And so we talked about the first thing about the concept of whether smicha actually is the same. The imitation smicha has to have the same guidelines as the original smicha. The second thing that we have to deal with comes from a pasuk in Dvarim. Som tasim alecha melech. The Torah tells us when it comes to appointing a king, you shall surely appoint a king over yourself, asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha bo, that Hashem your God will choose you, mikerev achecha tasim alecha melech, from amongst your brothers you shall appoint a king. The rest of the pasuk is sort of irrelevant to our conversation tonight. But based on that, Som tasim alecha melech, the Midrash says, melech velo malka, a king and not a queen. And that is copied by Maimonides. If you look at the Mishnah Torah, the Maimonides says in Ilchot Melachim, Ein ma'amidin isha b'malchut. You're not allowed to appoint a woman as a king or a queen. Shene'emar alecha melech, you shall appoint a king, velo malka, not a queen. V'chein, and then he copies it to any other position of authority which women can hold, and he says the following: V'chein kol mesimot shebiYisrael. Any type of position amongst the Jewish people, ein memanim bahem ela ish. You can only, says Maimonides, appoint a man. Why? Everyone's looking at me like this. It's not that. So, right, exactly, from the pasuk, from the concept of, that's where they learn it from. There is also, sorry, right.
You know, I've got to go back and ask this because it's bothering me.
Yes, of course.
The word Shnei Hanashim, the two men. Okay, if it said Shtei Nashim, I could understand that you said, okay, it's women, but Anashim is a collective. So what word would
That's
they have
correct,
used?
and you can also say it about the Shema, for example, Shinantam levanecha v'dibat habam. Okay, why does the Torah say banecha v'lo menotecha, your sons and not your daughters?
That's okay, but
I agree with you.
making halacha based, what word would you use if you were to be referring
So
to men and women?
the Torah, what they might respond is that if the Torah wanted to include women, it would specifically say, like it does in certain places, also men and also women. Okay. Anyway, back to the Rambam, and there is a concept that a woman called Sarara, that a woman shouldn't be appointed to a position of authority amongst the Jewish people. That is why, for many years, women couldn't serve in most Orthodox shuls as presidents. It is also.
It's still that way today.
It's still
in a
that
lot of
way in Young
schools.
Israel in the States.
Really?
Yes,
Young
you
Israel
get kicked out if you have
No,
a
they
woman
get
president.
around it. They have women as not presidents with some other title. It's
But
not.
Officially, there's a lot of them
Young
that want
Israel,
to
you
do it.
can't have a woman as a
There,
president.
there aren't many that.
Okay, that shows how isolated I am. I guess I didn't know that.
Maybe just to reframe what you said slightly, when you said that's why women haven't been allowed to be presidents in shuls, maybe that could be reframed as that's the argument that's been used for excluding women from presidency in shuls.
Yes. Well, however you wanted to say it, I'm not against saying that either. However you wanted to say it. Okay, I don't have any problem saying that either. But that is what Maimonides says based on this Gemara, that it's not just, and he also uses, there's also Gemara in Kiddushin, which extends it not just to the monarchy, but also to other positions of authority. Now, Rav Moshe Feinstein, the question is, and again, there are so many different opinions here, we're just going to use Rav Moshe Feinstein's halachic responsa to summarize them all, because he does quite a good job, and he's asked about a woman being a mashkicha kashrut, supervising the kashrut, and whether because that's a position of authority. And remember, Moshe Feinstein, although actually he's chidushei halacha, when he talks about halacha, he's much more revolutionary than Rav Soloveitchik. He's not conservative at all in many of Piskei halacha, but he still lives very much in the Haredi world. And he's asked whether a woman can be a mashkicha kashrut. And there he does, I think, a good job, although I'm sure there are many other opinions he doesn't bring, but he does a good job of summarizing different opinions as to whether this concept of melech velo malka also applies to all other positions. And he comes to the conclusion that although the Rambam holds one way, there are many other opinions, and I think Rashi, Tosfot, the Rosh, who hold that it only applies to king and not a queen. If there are other people who also hold like that, I'm sure there are amongst the Rishonim. But he says, Rav Moshe Feinstein, that would be better to go the Chumrah like the Rambam. But in this particular situation, he says that in a time of need, you are allowed to let the woman be a mashkicha kashrut, and so he allowed it in that particular situation, as far as I know. And that is, here we see that, again, although the Rambam is obviously a very important halachic authority, there were those that disagreed with him. The other thing is how you understand this concept of authority or srara. What does that actually mean? So, for example, some say that because now we have democratic elections most of the time, whether it's a shul board or any type of Jewish organization, many times there are actually democratic elections, so therefore this concept of authority no longer applies anyway. So even if you were to say that we hold like the Rambam, there are many who say that this concept of holding authority over a group of people is not like it used to be, and with democracy and the concept of someone being democratically elected, that no longer applies. Yes,
Just
Adrian.
rewinding half a step back. You
No
said
problem.
In times of need, what you can have a
I
female
think,
to be a
to the best of my knowledge, over there he was talking about her parnasa. She had no other way of making a livelihood. I think the father, her husband, wasn't around for one reason or another, and the question was asked to him whether, in terms of her livelihood, she would, and to feed her kids, feed her family, to put bread on the table, she was allowed to serve as a mashkicha kashrut, which in the society which Rav Moshe Feinstein lives in, that's unheard of.
Okay.
I think it probably would have been unheard of. I don't know for sure, but it definitely wasn't the norm. To have a mashkicha kashrut who's a woman who has authority. Now, the interesting thing about it as well is that there's actually one position of authority which is not democratically elected, and it's probably the position which, over the last 50 years, women have most served in, and nobody seems that I've seen actually talks about that being problematic. and that is
Mikveh lady.
not a mikveh lady, because that's a little bit different. I don't think a mikveh lady has authority over people, but it's a school principal.
Oh.
Right? A school principal isn't democratically elected. They have the power to hire and fire. And I think over the last 50 years, even when having a woman as a shul president was unheard of in most Orthodox shuls, women were serving as school principals. Even in women's schools, that would, according to those who say, who hold like the Rambam, that would be problematic, I think. And I don't know anyone who's addressed that problem. So that's interesting. I'll leave that if anyone has heard of someone who addresses that in one of their halachic responsa. But that's just an interesting point. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
You were going to say before why women can't be in that position.
Say that again?
Why women can't be like in a authority position.
Right, because of the pasuk of melech velo malka, som tasim alecha melech. So there, the Midrash tells us there has to be specifically a king and not a queen, and there are many others based on a Gemara who extend that not just, like the Rambam over here that I brought, who extend that not just to the monarchy, but to any position of authority.
Is there a reason behind that? Like,
Is there a reason
just a
behind that? So
simple-
I actually asked, it's a pasuk. And the question is, how much you learn from the pasuk. My aim tonight is not to talk about why the Torah excluded in certain cases women from different things, and that is a whole shiur in and of itself. And I actually think that I don't really have the answer for it, so there's no point me giving a shiur on that. And I think sometimes those who do are really short-changing people because they give quite weak answers, in my opinion. I don't have the answers to all those questions, but there are many questions I have, and I try and continue to learn about them. Anyway, back to those. So we've now talked about two things. One is the concept of smicha, whether the smicha imitation has to be the same that we have today, has to be the same as the original smicha. And the second thing that we've talked about is the concept of authority, and would that be problematic? And we've seen different opinions. Now, I want to go back to this concept of psak halacha and dayanut and being a judge and dvorah, right, which is the most obvious question, not necessarily on smicha, although she was a judge, definitely dayanut, and also having really on both things, right, a position of authority. And I don't know if the smicha, she didn't get a certificate, but she definitely, if you're a judge, you're judging people. That's the definition of it. And so therefore, if you have a look at the next source, which is from Sefer Shoftim, the book of Judges, describing Dvorah, Udvorah Isha Neviah, Eshet Lapidot. She's the wife of Lapidot, was a prophetess. She led Israel at that time. And then it gives us an actual description of what she used to do. She used to sit under the palm of Devorah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would come to her for decisions. So she was definitely a judge. Yes?
Could you briefly tell us the difference between Shoftim and Dayanim?
There might not be a difference. Who said there was a difference? There can be.
Because if we say, Devorah was a judge, etc.,
So that's my question, exactly. That's what we're going to get to some of the answers that are suggested, how she could be a judge. It's not just that she's called a shofetet. The Sefer Shoftim actually describes to us that she used to sit under a palm tree, and that's what she did. So you can't try and... That's exactly what she did. You can't wiggle your way out of it. It says it explicitly. That's exactly what she was doing. So... first of all, there are many, many different ways in which those who both say that she was a judge, she wasn't a judge, how do you work that out? I'll just give some of those different opinions. There are those who say that she didn't actually judge herself, but she would teach others how to judge. So she had a lot of knowledge, but she wasn't. I know everyone's looking at me like, how can you say that? That's ridiculous. But... if you open the Gemara, you'll find a lot of very weird and wonderful things. Okay, so that wouldn't be the only one, and that would definitely not be the most far-fetched one. But in other words, she had no authority because she was a woman. She had no authority to actually be the judge, but she was teaching others. She was just learning with others or teaching others how to judge. That's one way to understand it. The other way to understand it is that there is a halacha which says that even though your relative, for example, let's say that I had a fight with someone and we decided we're going to go before a Beit Din, and actually my brother happened to be a Dayan, and even though usually that wouldn't be allowed because he's a relative of mine, both me and the person that I was fighting with decided that we would both be happy to use my brother because he's a pretty fair guy, and they wouldn't think that he would have any bias towards me. In other words, if both of us accept upon ourselves the authority of my brother, then there's no longer any problem. And so therefore there are those who solve the problem of Devorah maybe the problem's the wrong word, but the story of Devorah, by saying that the reason why Devorah was allowed to be a judge is because the Jewish people accepted her as the judge, so even though she might not necessarily have the power to be a judge, she was accepted by everybody.
So that basically that's playing on the language of the Ya'alu Aleha, so that they were coming voluntarily to her for judgment. Right. So that you can see that argument in the language that they're coming to her voluntarily,
Right.
they're choosing to come to her as a judge. Okay, that's lovely, but it absolutely flies in the face of don't appoint a judge over yourselves, because that's exactly what they're doing by submitting themselves to her authority. We talk about in law, we talk about submitting to the jurisdiction of a court. That is allowing the judge to be the authority over you.
And that's what exactly. So you're saying, but then that's the problem with the pasuk, because the pasuk says you should appoint a king or whatever it is over you.
That's right.
Okay.
What they've done is they've voluntarily appointed
The judge.
And if the Rambam, so if you have it tightly melechel and marker, then she wasn't a marker. She was a.
No, she was.
The question is how the Rambam understand
what's going on. Correct, because according to the Rambam, but not just the Rambam, because if she was a judge, although then you're still left with the problem of being an authority.
Yeah, but only for the Rambam.
Yes.
If you're very tight and say a woman can be anything apart from
a judge,
apart from a queen,
right?
Then she wasn't a queen, fine. But the interesting question is, or our interesting question is, how the Rambam understand how Torah was functioning.
Because he holds, it's not just a queen, it's also...
Right, it's everything.
Right.
Okay.
So who's Lapidot? No one, other than...
not important.
So that's called the first qualification.
Anyway, he was the high
So
secretary. He was
she
the
has to be
husband
a
of
married
Deborah.
woman.
That's how you know she's an authority, right?
Exactly.
The first
All right. Anyway.
She was a woman of fire, but we won't go there.
I want to now come back to a couple of other things, and that is there are different ways. Also, there is another way of saying that Dvorah wasn't a dayan, but she was giving psak halacha, which a lot of people, as we'll see now, almost across the board, there's no one who says that there's an actual forbidden. There's no isur halacha with a woman giving a psak halacha. We'll see that. I didn't bring all the opinions, but if you look at the Sefer HaChinuch, for example, so there was an isur, there was something forbidden, there was a law which forbid people from coming into the Beit HaMikdash when they were drunk. And it says, the Sefer HaChinuch, this is also with men and women, and also giving psak halacha, basically, when you're drunk. Not a good idea anyway, but it's actually also something which is forbidden. It applies in all the time, not just in the Mikdash, but it applies all the time with males. And so too with a clever woman who can give psak halacha. And there doesn't seem to be anyone apart from one Magen Avraham that I found that actually says that intrinsically there is a problem with a woman giving a psak halacha. The only one that I could find, and I'm not here talking about a position of authority, I'm just talking about a woman giving a psak halacha. So we're going to come back to this concept of Devorah and the Dayan, but in terms of psak halacha, because one of the opinions was that Devorah was not necessarily judging, she was giving a psak halacha. If you look at the Magen Avraham...
Sorry, before you do, just because my memory is bad, is that roughly 15th century?
About that, I thought it was the 16th, but I could be wrong.
And in which country?
So it's interesting. As far as I know, we're not quite sure exactly who wrote the Sefer.
I have this Sephardi image in my mind.
I don't think that it was from the lands of Sfarad, but I could be wrong.
So I'm just trying to place him in relation to Rambam, really.
No, he's after the Rambam.
He's after Rambam, but presumably he's aware of Rambam.
Barcelona.
From Barcelona, so I'll take that back.
I thought it was Spain, yeah.
All right. So
yeah,
Not if you ask them.
we know.
Rabbi Elson, not if you ask them.
Yeah, so I'm interested in, because presumably then, well not presumably, no one should make such assumptions, but he's going to be aware of Rambam. He's presumably going to follow Rambam on the issue, like not necessarily. I don't know anything about that. So because then it leads to the question. Okay, we've got Rambam saying lo malka, lo isura, right? but then does separately not find this.
Well, the Rambam would have a problem with all of it. The Rambam would have a problem with all of it. He might. The only thing he might. No, Psak Halacha, I don't think. Psak Halacha doesn't seem like the Rambam has a problem with just giving a Psak Halacha, but definitely position of authority, he would have a problem with.
Just to clarify an earlier question, it was actually 13th century Spain.
13th century Spain.
If
There
I
we go.
recall correctly, when he's discussing all of this, he's also saying that women are all of weak minds, they're confused, etc.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, he's also saying before this or after this. So he would have a problem with women.
With the concept
Well,
of an Isha.
the Rambam was the one who says that. Remember that a woman, it's inappropriate for a woman to leave her house more than twice a month.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, he obviously lives in a certain very conservative
Yeah.
society.
And possibly legal to live in Spain.
Yeah, because he leaves Spain.
Yeah.
So anyway, if you look at the Magen Avraham, which is actually the last source on the sheet, anyway, they're having a whole discussion over there that the Drisha wrote with regards to lighting candles on Yom Tov, and we won't go into the discussion now. All that is important for our discussion is that the Drisha writes something in the name of his mother. So in other words, he quotes his mother when it comes to halacha, and the Magen Avraham has a problem with that. If you look 4 lines down, 3 lines down at the end, in the Hadrisha b'shem imo, right? The Drisha writes in his mother's name, Aval, says the Magen Avraham, ein chachma li'isha, right? Women, there's no chachma was not given to women, and so therefore don't come along and quote your mother to me, because actually she's not able, or we don't accept the halachic opinions of women, because ein chachma l'nisha lo chalku chachamim, because that they weren't. We just have this thing, says to Magen Avraham, that chachma was not given to women, and so therefore he has a problem with the fact that the Rishad quotes his mother when it comes to halacha. Interesting what he would do with the whole story of Bruria, and the fact that Bruria actually argues with the Chachamim, and her Psak Halacha is accepted in some cases, and that's from the times of the Mishnah, so it would be a little bit hard for them to argue with that. But I want to now separate what we have learned into 3 different categories, because it seems that there is very, very little objection, or definitely technical objection, to women giving Psak Halacha. There's only one that we can find, and even that we find a little bit funny, and it's hard to understand how the Magen Avraham can say such things, even from the times of the Mishnah and Bruria. It's hard to say that there would be a technical issue with a woman giving Psak Halacha. And before we get to the concept of women rabbis, Yoetzet Halacha, where women are trained, both practically trained and also have the knowledge to give Psak Halacha in issues of Tarat HaMishpacha, the family purity and the laws of Nida, is something which is one of the most important things, I think, that has happened over the last 30 years. It is really, in the year 2016, these are questions that women should under no circumstances be asking men, and it's extremely uncomfortable, and therefore most of the time they just won't ask anybody. And that obviously creates all sort of problems, both shalom bayit and halachic, and therefore it's just not a good idea. And issues of Tarat HaMishpacha, definitely, I don't think there are any Yoetzet Halacha in Sydney, as far as I know, which is really unfortunate, and therefore sometimes the halacha is still left in the hands of men in this area. But I think that the concept of Yoetzet Halacha, especially because we see there's no technical issue with women giving Psak Halacha from times of the Mishnah until today, there's very little objection, technical objection to it. That is very, very important, almost crucial in the year 2016. Even religious people, when you teach them for their wedding and you explain to them that there's this thing, and sometimes you have to ask the rabbi questions about it, they can't believe it, right? And that is something which I understand why they can't believe it, and therefore we have to try and encourage as much as we can the concept of Yoetzet Halacha, because I think that's really important. Yes, Jackie?
There is online access to.
Yes, there is on the Nishmat website you're talking about. Yeah. Right, so the Nishmat website has it, although...
Except that there comes a point sometimes where that's
Right.
so they go ask a rabbi anyway.
Exactly. So they say go and ask a rabbi. I heard a story a couple of weeks ago where someone went and asked a Yoetzet Halacha question, and she said you should go ask a rabbi, and she said I did ask the rabbi, and he said to come and ask you. Okay. So and also the problem is that there are some questions which can't be asked and answered over the internet. So I agree the Nishmat hotline and internet site is fantastic, but there, the buck stops at a certain point. You can't ask all the questions, and even over there they say consult your rabbi. And I think that even when it doesn't come to practical and having to show the rabbi anything, it's just uncomfortable for women to discuss that with males. I fully understand that, and therefore I think that the concept of Yoetzet Halacha should definitely be encouraged. With regards to positions of authority, we saw different opinions as to whether women could take positions of authority. Again, that is a halachic dispute. Rav Moshe Feinstein seems to set out those different opinions, but there is definitely room to say today, and I don't think that there's anyone really in this community. Well, that's not true. I think that today it's very hard to say that there is a halachic objection to women being appointed to positions of authority, and I think that there's this whole question a lot of the time whether something is asur or something which is mutar, based on all these different shitot, all these different opinions. And the best answer I've heard to all these questions is Rav Yehuda Mital Zichrono Livracha, who was a founding Rosh Yeshiva of Har Etzion, and he was talking about, and I think this applies to a lot of things. He used to get asked a lot, and it's funny because I don't actually think this question is all that important in a city like Sydney, but he was asked about mixed youth movements, which I think, they're just, it's funny that people ask this type of questions, but I guess in a place like Alon Shvut, that's actually a relevant question, and whether that was proper. And he said, well, if someone from Meir Sharim came and asked me, should he go to a mixed youth movement, I would tell him no. Because they live in a society where the men have a role, the women have a role, there's almost complete gender segregation, even over a Shabbat table, and therefore probably isn't appropriate, even halachically appropriate, for men and women, for boys and girls to be together in a youth movement. But if someone from Alon Shvut, where everyone works together, where everyone eats Shabbat meals together, comes and asks me, so the answer is different. And I also think that some of that also applies with the question of the concept of authority. There are different opinions, as we've seen. But I think that they're in communities where women are given a certain role and not expected to get up and speak on panels or give speeches before other men and women together. Maybe the concept of, or take leadership positions like the president of a shul, maybe the concept of the Rambam applies, because in their particular society, that's what they've chosen to do, and therefore the Isur of the Rambam would apply. Whereas in a community which is accepted that women should have exactly the same opportunities as men, it's very hard to say that this ruling of the Rambam applies when we can see that they have the opportunity to do absolutely everything else, not just in academia, by the way, but in anything, really. I remember, I actually still can't believe they asked this question, but at the end of my first year in Yeshiva, so on MTA, you have this sort of question and answer with the Rabbanim. By the way, how long have I been going for? Because I usually don't ever speak for longer than a certain amount of time.
No, you're good. You're still under an hour.
So I've gone past 45 minutes?
Yes.
Wow, never do that. All right, so I'll be quick. One of these South Africans, when this question and answer with the Rabbanim, put up his hand and asked, can a girl be a Rosh Machaneh of a B'nai Akiva camp? And the Australians were like, what? Of course you go. Like I didn't grow up, when I grew up, there wasn't a Rosh Machaneh who was a male. So and that's why I'm saying I think there are differences on the communities, and maybe when we say that there are different opinions, so maybe it's possible that some opinions apply to some communities, and some apply to others. That's very possible, and I don't think that's a particularly controversial thing to say, although some might disagree. The next thing that I wanted to talk about, which is probably the most controversial issue, yes?
Before we get there, though, because I think what you've just raises a really important issue in this whole arena, which is that given that so many exclusions of women in various spaces are predicated on Kabbalah Tzibur, the question which is the honour of the community, the question then arises in modern debate, is that an objective or a subjective concept? And I think, as you very rightly put it, and as it sounds like Rabbi Pavitali put it, it has to be a subjective concept.
So I think that
Because what
That-
is relevantly the honour of the community or the shame of
yeah,
the
but the
community?
question is how you define the honour of the community. And I think for those who have seen that there was some debate about Rav Yoni Rosenzweig's Shua on women aliyot and how he defined Kvorat Tzibur as opposed to Rabbi Sascha Katz. That was fascinating, and I think I'll get there in a second. So when it comes to women rabbis, and that's probably the most controversial issue of all the things, because a lot of the other things that I've spoken about have basically, in many cases, become the norm. Right? I don't know of. Sorry, again, I'll take that back. But definitely, women serving as presidents of shuls in this community is not completely unbelievable. I don't know whether that's in every shul, and so therefore I don't want to speak. Oh, really? Okay. But well, I don't think it. I think anyway. I don't want to say because it's going live. Maybe if you turn the live thing off, I would say more. But that's really not a good idea. I told you not to make it live. Sorry.
Female presidents of great synagogue.
Yeah. I said it's not an unbelievable thing.
It's a very
No, it's the
common
norm.
I know.
Anyway.
To me, it just sounds like the difference between having the knowledge and applying it appropriately with wisdom and with understanding of the society that you're going to apply it to.
Yes.
And that's why a rabbi needs a broad experience of the world and the societies that he's going to serve in, or she's going to serve in. Oh.
Okay, so that is 100% true, and I think it also applies to the concept of that Rav Herschel Schachter talks about quite a bit when it comes to these issues, and that's tzniut, which I didn't address. And he talks about that sanua isn't just the clothes you wear, but also the way you act and the positions that a person holds, and it's not necessarily appropriate for a woman to hold certain positions. That's one of his arguments, not all of them, but that's one of his arguments. And again, I think the concept of tzniut, and that's not. I think Chachamim made certain parts of tzniut at least quite subjective. For instance, if you look at the Tshuva of the Suda Eish, where he talks about whether women are allowed to vote, which Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook forbade, and he talks over there about the concept of how maybe in Rav Kook's time it wasn't sanua, but obviously, and he's writing about 60 for elections, either in municipal elections or general elections or or elections for the Vad, whatever it is. Women, according to Rav Kook, shouldn't get to vote. The Suda Eish allowed it, right? And that's something which I really don't think that there's any rabbi today who will get up and say that today that women are not allowed to vote without losing his job, although I always get surprised. But I don't think that would be. Rav Kook mainly lived in the 19th century, where women were not, in most countries, were not given the vote. So, which is why, sorry?
And the Suda Eish?
The Suda Eish lived, I think he passed away in 1967. The Suda Eish, or maybe just after, I can't remember if he died before or after the Six-Day War, but he lives, and he's a fascinating character. Mark Shapiro has a book on him, which I encourage everyone to read, because he lived both in Eastern and Western Europe, and based on that, he changes his whole outlook on secular education. He's the one who writes about mixed youth movements, for example, because he comes from Eastern Europe where something like that would just be out of the question, and then he goes to Western Europe and he sees a whole different side of maybe more modern orthodoxy, we would call it. So he's a fascinating character, and he talks about that. He says that maybe in Rav Kook's time and others who forbade it at that time, it was different, and I think therefore tzniut also would apply in this particular case, and also amongst certain communities. I also don't think it's fair to say that those communities, the way they treat women is horrible, etc. That's the different roles that men and women play in that community, and I think by and large, although I haven't done any survey on it, I think by and large the community works. Now there are those who might come and say no, but actually I think that by and large the community works. I know that there would be those who would disagree with that statement, but I do think that the person shouldn't come along and say that, because that's how they would like the community to work, that's how the community functions, and so therefore maybe for them, for a woman to be in that particular community, for a woman to take a position of authority like the president of a shul, that would not be allowed. Now, when it comes to rabbis, this particular topic and the concept of Maharat, which I'm sure Rabbi Elton and Hinda know a lot more about than I do, but what I would like to say is the following. I feel uncomfortable with the concept of the Maharat, and there are a few reasons for that, and I also want to read at the end Rabbi Norman Lamb and what he writes about it. But in any case, I want to start by saying the following. There is definitely a difference, I think, in my mind, and I saw that Rabbi Yisrael Katz also wrote about this in a different way, between what they're doing in Beit Knesset Ramban, Rav Benny Lau's appointment, and the concept of a Maharat. And with the concept of the Maharat, there are a couple of things which I think are different. One is the concept that they're getting, the main part is that they're receiving ordination, as far as I understand, and I stand to be corrected, but the concept of Maharat is they actually receive ordination, whereas Rav Benny Lau just took someone who had learned a long time in Migdal Oz and appointed her to a position where she could teach, give advice, counsel, and give shiurim, and give psak halacha, which is what many women or a rebbetzin in most of those things women do anyway. And therefore his appointment was seen as a lot less controversial. And by the way, the Israeli, as far as my understanding of it, the modern Orthodox community in Israel is far more conservative than parts of the United States. And so therefore there would be more reason for them to object to it. But I do think there's a difference. The other thing is that the slippery slope argument is used a lot by different people who object to it. And whilst I usually don't like that argument, I do think that here there is a case to say that once you appoint a woman as a rabbi or a maharat, in this particular case, the concept of the rabbi not being able to be counted in a minyan would be a little bit strange to people. And therefore I think that that can lead to certain things which are against halacha, women being counted in minyanim, women saying dvarim shebiktusha. Whilst I don't usually like the slippery slope argument, I think here there is room to say that it could be problematic. The last two things that I want to talk about one is unity. So I also don't think that a person should dismiss good ideas just because they're controversial or just because some people will speak about it. But in this particular case, and especially in communities across Australia, and I don't want to talk about in other places because I don't know enough about it, but especially within communities in Australia, something like that would cause such controversy and division, even within more modern Orthodox shuls, that I think a person has to give it time or has to think about whether that is a good idea and what it achieves, as opposed to all the division and disunity that it would cause within a shul. And whilst I don't think a person should just do everything and get consensus, sometimes I think the help or what it would achieve is outweighed by the controversy it would stir up, and that I think is also problematic. And the last thing that I want to talk about is that halachically we've seen that there are opinions which would allow it. There's no technical issur. But I also think, and this is where I want to end off, that, and I'm not just playing with my phone because I'm bored, I'm trying to find the picture because I couldn't print it off, so I took a picture of what Rabbi Norman Lamb wrote in an interview that he gave, and what he said was written down.
Just for viewers, do you want to clarify who Rav Norman Lamb is?
Just for yes, Rabbi Norman Lamb was the president and dean of Yeshiva University, but more importantly, he was a major central figure in the 20th century and the beginning, although he then got quite elderly, of the 21st century in thought. In people read his books, his drashot, everything basically. But he writes the following, this is what he said in an interview that was recorded. He says the following: there are certain things that are acceptable only in the long run. I approve of the idea of increasing the role of women in religious life and think it is an important one. At the same time, things have to be done gradually. To have a woman learn Gemara a generation or two ago, like women learn Gemara today, would have been too revolutionary. But with time, things change. Time answers a lot of questions, erodes discomfort, and helps. So my answer when I was asked by a reporter about what I think about women rabbis was basically, it's going too fast. I did not say it was wrong. I did not say it was right. It just has not paced itself properly. I was criticized, of course. People asked, you mean that Al Pi Din they're allowed to become rabbis? My response, I don't know. Are you sure they're not allowed to? Which I think is quite a clever way to say. Again, the there definitely, from all the halachic sources that we've seen today, there doesn't seem to be, there are definitely halachic ways, and not just minority opinions that no one's heard of, but actual proper halachic ways, which a woman would be allowed to become a rabbi. But there are also certain things which I think, at least for now, would prevent that, or make things a little bit, the advantages would be outweighed by many of the disadvantages. Yes?
So, just going to take what you've said, which is obviously not my opinion, I mean, it's quite different from my opinion, and going back to what Jackie was saying about Kavod Tzibur, if it's not divided, if Kavod Tzibur is to be read subjectively, which some would argue that it should be, if the particular community would not be divided, and there would be no controversy within that community, why should that community not appoint a Maharat? And the other point...
But hang on, I didn't say that my opinion should be... No, but I'm saying, I agree with, I accept your point.
Yeah, so
like as far as I've heard, the Maharat who's in Australia at the moment, that community, at least from what I've heard from people in it, is very united, and they've experienced it as something that brings them in and that has brought them together more. So in that case, that would be an example of an Australian community where having a Maharat has actually increased women's feeling of comfort and inclusion and participation in a way that the whole community feels more cohesion.
So, what I was going to end off with, the idea of Maharat bothers me, but the idea of women not coming to shul bothers me more. Right? So, it doesn't... I object to it, but my opinion is not considered by all other communities, apart from the shul I'm the rabbi of. And so therefore, if someone wants to appoint a rabbi, I don't think that people should excommunicate the person. Someone who wants to spread Torah and wants to help the community, why should they be excommunicated? I lay out my opinions why I object to it, but I don't think that means that that other communities have to accept what I have to say. In other words...
Do you feel like because I think it's great too that you've said, look, I'm not comfortable with it, but I'm not saying there is no halachic opinion that makes this valid. But is that something that you're saying, at this time I object because I don't feel that this would work in my community at this time, but that at some future time I feel like that would be, in other words... See what happens in the future. I'm also prepared to accept that my opinion might change to the right or left in a year's time or in 2 years' time. I'm also prepared to accept... these are the type of things which obviously will be discussed for many more years to come, and might become the norm in Orthodox or modern Orthodox Judaism, might not. I can't tell you what's going to happen in the future or how I'm going to feel about it in the future.
There are obviously women who have been appointed, have been ordained, and are going out already, going out into the world and going out doing stuff within Orthodox synagogues. Mainly in the United States, but also elsewhere, including Australia. So, as our colleague Judy Leverton would always say, it's about facts on the ground, and these women are there; they're already there. So,
and they're being well received. Like Rabbi Moshe Goodnick even met with Rabbi.
Hang on, I didn't say that people should excommunicate them, never meet them, and never hear them speak.
No, but they said very positive.
I also think that for the sake of Facebook live stream, we should use specific names of people who are not in the room.
Yeah, okay.
No, but I'm saying my objection to it is them serving in a rabbinic role in a shul. I don't think that people should excommunicate them. I don't think they're heretics. I don't think they're outside the Orthodox world. I didn't say any of that.
So you made the slippery slope argument. I've got to ask you, is it a fundamental job of a rabbi to do funerals?
Sorry?
Is it a fundamental job of a rabbi to do funerals?
It depends what the rabbi's description of his role was. What's that got to do with?
Is ordaining Kohanim a slippery slope to start allowing Kohanim to handle dead body, to be in the room with dead bodies, to go to...
No, but that's a very far... But what you're trying to argue through that isn't my argument. The argument of slippery slope is far-fetched. I tried to argue that in this particular situation, I don't think it's so far-fetched.
But you're saying that women rabbis, it's going to be women counting in the minyan. So if the job of a rabbi... Because
the job of a rabbi, and again, that has to be defined as to what exactly that shul expected of that particular rabbi, but the job of a rabbi has traditionally been that they're also a central part of a minyan, right? That doesn't necessarily mean they're the chazan, but it means that they're around the place they give the shul focus and structure. Again, it depends in what role they were serving. As a pulpit rabbi, I'm talking about. If they were serving as a rabbi just in order to give shiurim, that's very different, and that particular argument wouldn't apply in that case. But
And what if you're a rabbi working in a school, a rabbi working in a hospital, a rabbi working in
agreed.
a Kedusha?
But there are minyanim at all those places too, though.
Sorry?
But there are minyanim at all those places. Like a school would have a Shua service and would have.
I agree that in certain cases that argument wouldn't apply. If you were talking about a rabbi who is a campus rabbi who is just giving shiurim, that wouldn't apply. If you're talking about a pulpit rabbi, I think the slippery slope argument in this case does appeal to. Like it makes sense to me. Because the job of the rabbi, at least in shuls here that I've seen, even if they're not the chazan, because in some shuls actually they also need to be the balkorah and the chazan, etc. The job of the rabbi is actually to give the shul focus. Now,
Okay, but that's employment law. I'm going to say depends on how you write the contract and job description.
correct.
It's not about the time.
Right. So you're 100%. You are.
Degree, and then I write a job description based on what I want them to do, not based on the degree.
Correct. And I
That's
agree.
why
So we agree on that particular
But
point.
that's why the slippery slope argument is in the hands of the congregation. The congregation.
Yes, I agree with you, and I think, for example, that the congregations who's to say that the congregations won't employ them in that particular role?
So who's to say
That would be-
who's to say that the congregations aren't going to want a Kohen rabbi to run funerals and be in the Chevra Kedisha? It's a slippery slope.
But that's
Yeah.
been around
Okay,
forever.
but
That's
that's a little bit. I tell you why that's.
It's still
But
it's
we've
a
had
job,
that, but we've
it's
had
a
that
job
rabbi-
that a rabbi fulfills on a regular basis, and somebody's excluded from something because of a status
It is
that they
not
have.
excluded. He just sits outside and there's a microphone.
There's a workaround.
There's ways of working around
There's a
it.
workaround.
There's a workaround. So why should that be a
I
workaround?
see that there are a number of people.
When there was a first, when the
I
first
don't
time
understand why
the president
a
They
was-
always
woman,
have money.
why, sorry, but to me, it's like we're looking for arguments, for the argument's sake. So a woman becomes a rabbi, she's still going to need 10 congregants to, or grab men off the street, however, to make, minyan man. She cannot be minyan man.
No.
Simple.
Uh,
Look,
Why,
absolutely.
why not? Why can't she?
Sorry.
There's a woman coming from the minute.
Because otherwise it's halacha.
No.
There's a lot of things you
It's
can't.
absolute. If we can just recognise things as being absolute,
It's called within
it's-
halacha, and that's not.
So let me, because I see that there's the most opposition I face is from the slippery slope argument, and I can understand that. So let me ask you something. Would that, do you,
You never make a change in the
Right.
community before it's ready, right? So I think that's much easier for me to accept on the basis that this community might not be ready for it yet, but that community is.
do you not believe that if there was and I'm not talking again, I accept your argument regarding maybe a campus rabbi or a rabbi whose job was not to be part of minyanim and run minyanim. Do you not accept the fact though that if a woman was appointed as a pulpit rabbi and given that type of authority, that there would be certain breaking down of halachic boundaries within the shul?
It depends on whether she says she's committed to halacha in the first place.
If she wasn't, why would she want to be a rabbi?
Of the rabbi in question.
And the community that appointed her.
Yeah.
Like if she specifically says, as a lot of the women do, I don't want to be counted in the minyan, I don't consider myself that, the community doesn't want that.
It's also problematic that, as Rabbi said, you can't have it's. I don't have the word to describe it, but you've got like nine people there, and
You're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting.
You're waiting and you're waiting and waiting. You can't just it's. Again, I don't have the word. You have the rabbi there, and she can't be counted, regardless of whether she's the pulpit rabbi.
It's an opportunity for change.
So the woman who comes to say Kaddish also can't be counted. So
That's true, and
I think that's
there's also a figure
And I think that
of somewhat
woman's not very
authority.
place to be, right? So
Well, we've had it in our shul.
But I also.
But nobody ever suggested we're going to count you so you can say Kaddish, right?
But I also am happy.
More of a halakhic reason to do so.
But I'm also happy to accept that there might be communities. I don't think that someone who appoints a woman rabbi is outside the Orthodox pale.
No, we know that.
I don't think that my objection. I mean, I gave my objections to it, but I don't think that means that they should be considered outside a certain thing if they follow halacha. I do think though that in that particular case that might break down certain halachic boundaries.
What's the difference between learning and whatever between Yoetzet and Maharat?
or it's the title given to the person who's done
No,
the
so,
work.
so it's more the title, but they've done more learning as well.
Yeah, she.
Yoetzet is usually learned about like Nido, but
Yeah.
to give a slight
Less-
on those issues, whereas someone who's on the Harat has studied
Fully.
for ordination. She's done the same degree that a male rabbi would do to become a rabbi in modern Orthodoxy. You know, that's
Anyway, sorry, yes.
One more question. What happens if there's a difference in opinion between a woman who can give a Pesach and a rabbi in within that community? If there's a
So I don't
Is there
believe,
a precedent,
and
or-
I made this quite clear in my talk. I don't believe in the concept that one rabbi takes. In other words, people have the choice; they can decide which rabbi they would like to follow, which rabbi they would like to ask. And most of the time, by the way, today I think that most people are looking outside their shuls for Psak Halacha. They might ask the rabbi the shul for some guidance, but and I don't have a problem with that. That's part of the bit of living in a world with internet and with it doesn't. You can't say that's why the whole concept of the Modern Atra annoys me, because what does that mean? So you could say the Modern Atra means they set policy for the shul, which I agree with the pulpit rabbi. But say the Modern Atra, and therefore they have to make a decision, and everybody has to follow that decision. Or if you need particular guidance in some area, I get it. But if it's the Modern Atra, and everyone, even in their private lives, has to follow the opinion of the Modern Atra, that's ridiculous. Right? Because you can just go on Google and look something up and decide you don't want to see what they're saying is rubbish. So that also really bothers me, and I don't,
So do you see nothing happening much with female rabbis?
I'm not sure how to answer that question. I don't know what the future holds. Telling you what I feel about it now, that might be different in the year 2020, might be different in the year 2017, might be. I think that these are ongoing questions.
So to what extent, because I noticed that a lot of people do have these objections or discomforts, including people who, I won't say any names, but there are people who've expressed discomfort or objections who I know have later actually hired maharats or worked with women rabbis in the Orthodox world. So what I wonder is, like what kind of exposure you have had or plan to have. In other words, have you actually talked to people in these communities and found out kind of how it's working, or what kind of boundaries they set so that halacha is followed in these ways in terms of minyan? And I mean, I think one of the biggest problems is also this thing that people do when they say, oh, we need 10 people, and then all the women in the room feel like they're not people. So that's another...
Are we still on Facebook thing? Because I just thought something I want to say and I don't want it to go live.
Okay, I'll say. All right.
So the answer is like this.